Me to turn the TV on again. All right, welcome back to Tech Entrepreneurship. We're going to start fast and end furiously. All right, so today we're going to be talking about the employer promise, And as a startup, you're going to be making lots of promises. You're going to have to try to achieve that buy-in from not only your customers, but your investors and everyone around you. Everyone needs to believe what you're doing is bigger than yourself. Everything that you're doing is bigger than you. Okay, so when we talk about the employer promise, we're talking about a trifecta here. And I'm sure many of you have experienced the negative side of the employer promise. So at the very top, we're going to have the startup. Okay, and this startup is really the employer. Okay, so we're just going to I'll put startup here. And you have two customers as the startup owner, the founder. You have two primary customers. You have the internal customer, and you also have the external customer. The internal customer obviously being the employee, and the external being the actual end user. Now, primary interaction is between the employees on the ground, and in many cases this is you, but if not, the employees on the ground, and these are called encounters. Now, on the right side of the employer promise, the employer, you, I should say, the startup, is essentially promising a certain amount of uniqueness. And I stress uniqueness. People love unique. Again, in the blue ocean, we need to be separating ourselves and differentiating ourselves. We need to be unique. And there are going to be certain performance and quality characteristics that you're going to represent. Performance, quality, maybe it's also service. Right? Now, the encounter is a very academic word. And before I got a hold of this graph, it was very academic. The reality of it is, an encounter is really all about the experience. The experience. And we've talked about this in some of our guerrilla marketing sessions, where the experience is everything. Experience is so important. That's why you go into a Starbucks. You don't pay $5.50 for a coffee loca mocha mix at Starbucks. You pay because the ambiance. You're paying so you can go in there and feel that sophistication. But in order to get that sophistication, the employer also needs to make a promise to the employee. Now, the internal customer. Now, it's not just sophistication, it's customer service, it's follow-up, it's kindness, it's as simple as a smile. And we need to be aware that on this side, we're talking about values, we're talking about beliefs, we're talking about opportunity. As a startup, you're presenting opportunity to your employees. You're presenting opportunity to your staff, and it goes from top down. So here you have the founders. And then you might have, on down the line. In a larger corporation, it's the board of directors, the CEO, the vice presidents, upper management, lower management, et cetera. Or lower management, and then you have the man on the ground. But the question that I have, and this is what I asked you before, or what I told you that you've probably experienced the negative side, what happens hypothetically? Well, and this is a reality. What happens if you, the startup, are making certain representations, you're making certain claims that the product is going to have a certain performance behind it, it's going to have a certain quality, there's going to be an image, there's going to be a certain uniqueness. So you've done your job with the external customer. You've done your job representing that with the end user well. But what happens if you break your promise to the internal customer? How many of you have had your company that you work for, your superiors, your bosses, promise you that you were going to get a raise, that you were going to get a promotion, that you were going to have opportunity to move up, and it never happened? They broke this promise. They broke this promise. What happens to the interaction and the experience from the internal customer to the external customer? All of this here, the uniqueness, the quality, the image, the performance, all of this goes right out the window, because if your internal customer, your employee, and this is especially critical that you recognize this as a startup and you recognize it early on so you don't make the mistake later. If you do the same thing that's been done to you, your reputation is going to, your reputational equity is going to be minimal. In fact, your reputation that you are trying to build is going to start to decline precipitously. And what you're going to have eventually is customer terrorists. What is a customer terrorist? A customer terrorist is someone who has a bad experience. Someone who had a terrible experience, or somebody who had a defective product. And someone, and this used to be, this is the statistic about, I don't know, I'd say about 10 years ago. In 10 short years, this whole dynamic has completely changed. 10 years ago, the statistic was that if someone had a bad experience at a restaurant or with a product that they purchased, on average, they would tell 8 people on average. Now, with the progression of the internet and people having social media profiles and avatars ranging from Twitter to Facebook to Pinterest to et cetera, how many people will that internal or external customer tell, or potentially tell, if they have a bad experience, or if the promise is broken on one side of the leg or other? How many people will they tell? It could be hundreds. It could be thousands. And there are certain cases where it's millions upon millions upon millions. You see these cases on Yahoo where someone had a bad experience and wrote a letter and didn't get the response they wanted, and the next thing you know, it's viral. How about this? How about when and I saw this recently, a customer actually did not tip. Customer did not tip the server. And the server posted it online, and it went viral. The reputation of that individual was now in need of repair. And you don't want to have to defend your reputation, because it takes years to build, and it takes an instant to destroy. Years to build and an instant to destroy. How are you going to prevent this chink in the armor? How are you going to prevent that from happening? How are you going to prevent this? And it's fairly simple. The promises that you make, you need to keep. And as a small startup, more than anything, more than ever, you lead by example. I'm going to tell you a customer terrorist story that I have. When I was 18 or 19 years old, Domino's Pizza, which was at the time the pizza du jour of my palate, plainly because it was the cheapest, the least expensive. Domino's Pizza came out with an ad campaign. And the ad campaign stated that their pizzas were fresh and handmade, et cetera, or whatever. And that they were made with real cheese. And so we thought, wow, this is great. It's a very inexpensive pizza made with real cheese. And after about a year, Domino's Pizza was called out. Domino's Pizza called their cheese real cheese. That was the name of the company that they were buying the cheese from. So they were saying that we are making our cheese from real cheese. And it was really a synthetic bunch of chemicals meant to imitate cheese. So I have no idea what I was ingesting. But for a year, they advertised real cheese, real cheese. And they never really fully recovered from that. They've grown. But if you notice, they're doing a lot. In the last year, I've seen a lot of damage control ads and then backtracking. To this day, I am a customer terrorist for Domino's Pizza. I do not have anything good to say about it. If somebody asks me the pizza that I prefer, I'll tell them. And if they ask me, you know, what pizzas not to buy or what pizza to not buy, I'll gladly volunteer that. I am still to this day a customer terrorist. How many students do I have? One time, but they did this for a year, and they repeatedly and blatantly tried to deceive us. And I took it personally. I kind of took it like, hey, this CEO, the owner, is personally trying to hoodwink me. He's personally trying to deceive me. And he did it regularly. He did it over a year's period, and I believed him. And so to this day, I will not eat Domino's Pizza. But how many people am I telling? How many people will you tell if you have a bad experience? How many of you have had a poor experience? And the flip side is this. This is how important this is. If you do a good job, how many people on average will I tell, or will someone tell? Maybe one or two. if any at all. Primarily because it's expected. But if you do a continual good job, if that job is consistently at a higher level, if that pizza is at a consistently higher level, we'll take Grimaldi's Pizza, for instance, here in Arizona. I'm a very big fan. I eat at Grimaldi's maybe once every week. The service, the freshness. In fact, what time is it? Robert, let's get out of here. I eat there regularly. I will tell people about it if it's consistent. If it's a one-time, if it's my first time and one-time eating there and the service was good, I'm not going to tell anybody. It's got to be over a period of time, and most people are that way. Most people are that way. So keeping the employer promise has long-term positive and negative effects. Has long-term positive and negative effects. And the reality of it is it costs money to advertise. If you get me as a customer and over a period of time you have shown that your service or the product that I purchased is worthy of continual use or continual patronage, then you don't have to advertise to me. In fact, I will become an evangelist. I will become someone who describes your product or service in a positive light. And so not only am I going to be a continual customer, but here I am now talking about the benefits of being a customer of yours. The less advertising you need to do as a company, especially a startup, the more money you keep. And startups don't have the luxury of money, of having lots of money. Deliver on your promises, both to the internal and the external customer. Especially to the cult. The cult, we remember, they reject mediocrity and they accept superiority. The cult are the people before the early adopters. They are the opinion leaders. They are the individuals that will evangelize your product in a way that the early adopters or the late majority or the early majority will not be able to. Because the opinion leaders are where everybody looks to. Everybody's looking for their blessing on a product or service or a restaurant, whatever it may be. That's why you have movie critics. That's why you have restaurant critics. And it's that consistency. They go to these movies and they go to these restaurants completely anonymous. They want to see the consistency. They want to see the consistency. Now, I showed you this pyramid. And at the top of it, I had the founders. And I've been in business, especially with startups, long enough to know that ethics starts with the founders. Ethics starts with the CEO. And she or he determines the culture, the ethical nature of the business. And it's very difficult for me to teach you ethics. It's difficult for me to say, oh, I can teach it, but the values and norms and beliefs that you have now are because of years of your family ingraining certain ethics and values and beliefs. So it's difficult for me to teach it, and I don't want to preach it, but I can talk about it. And I can give you some examples of the importance. Ethics are not something that you turn on and off. Ethics are something that you continually have day in and day out. Other people might not know, but it's you that understands what you're doing positively and negatively. And what I want to talk about with respect to ethics is holistics. Holistics. I want you to look at the whole. Ethics is about looking at the big picture, not just your day-to-day or minute-to-minute actions. Of course, it has to do with that, but it's also about looking at the big picture. The question that I have for you is ethics a legal issue? Is ethics a legal issue? Pardon? It certainly depends, but the answer is really yes. And I'm not saying that you should be ethical because there's a legal ramification. No, no, no. But let me give you an example. British Petroleum 4 years ago had a pipe, I should say, drilled down into the Gulf of Mexico. And we all remember this. That pipe exploded. That pipe exploded. And the damage that it did to the environment and to whole communities and countries was incomprehensible. It was huge. But let me backtrack for a second and give you some background on this. In the 1950s, there was an argument within the U.S. government about whether or not the U.S. should try to go to the moon or try to go to the bottom of the ocean. And at the time, we were beginning our Cold War with Soviet Union, and there was a race to see who could build the biggest, fastest technologies, etc. And the argument really focused around the moon or the bottom of the ocean. And the scientists got together, and you know, the moon sounds a little sexier, but the scientists got together and they said, you know, the reality of it is it's probably easier to go to the moon than it is the bottom of the ocean. And if you think about it, even to this day, it's very difficult. And anytime it's very difficult to go to the bottom of the ocean. And this particular well, oil well that British Petroleum was drilling was at the bottom of an abyss, if that is such a thing. It was at the bottom of the ocean, very deep. And they knew, British Petroleum knew all the rules and regulations that they had to comply with in order to have a drill or drill at in the bottom of the ocean. They understood the rules and they played by them. They played by them. When they drilled into the Gulf, they did nothing wrong. Technically, they did nothing wrong. They put a mechanism on the well that would pinch it closed. It was a giant set of claws, if you will, or teeth, and it would, if that well happened to explode or something happened, it would automatically crimp the well, stopping a major catastrophe. Well, the problem is that although they abided by the rules and regulations, they did nothing wrong technically. There was an ethical and moral issue. They also knew that nothing had been tested. Not one mechanism had ever been tested at that depth. But it didn't say it in the rules and regulations. But they knew that there had not been any testing for any equipment of any type at that depth, especially a mechanism to prevent an oil leak or an oil spill. And so they could have tested it, but that would have cost them maybe $10 million. That would have been a cost of about $10 million to test to see if, in fact, the equipment at that depth with that pressure and that temperature would actually work. $10 million. And they said no, because we are abiding by the law. The law doesn't always mean that your ethics are in compliance with the environment, and the environment being people, animals, etc. They made a decision to go on ahead and take the chance of the equipment not working and drill the well and hope that it didn't explode, and it did. The worst case scenario happened. Is that a case of ethics? It is, because somebody purposely looked the other way and said, you know what, forget it. It's not worth it. The environment isn't worth it, nor are people's jobs, nor are people's communities. It's not worth it. And how much have they had to spend? Seven digits. Billions. And they will continue to have to spend billions, because British Petroleum is known for the Gulf oil spill. They're not known for, anymore anyways, for being a great contributor to society in both jobs and oil. They're just not known for. Now they were. But when you think of British Petroleum, you think of the oil spill. You think of the oil spill. They did not look at the big picture. They looked from an ethics standpoint. They looked at what the law required. And they did not hold themselves to a higher standard, because it was all about profits. And profits can skew ethics. So I say to you, look at the bigger picture. Look at the bigger picture. One last thing regarding this. This is how little we know about the bottom of the ocean. The first attempt to stop the leak, to stop the oil from gushing out of that well, was all their scientists and everybody had gotten together and they said, well, let's do this. Let's make a giant metal box, and on the bottom of it will be a hole. And what we'll do is we'll lower this box. And I don't know if you remember, they had a few failed attempts. We'll lower this box and then we'll just cap it. We're just going to, with its weight, we will lower the box right onto the cap, right onto the well. By the time it had gotten down within probably a few hundred feet of the well, the whole box was actually frozen. Inside the box turned to ice. It was a giant metal ice cube now. How was that going to fit over the well? It wasn't. They didn't know how to fix this well because they didn't have the technology. They did not know, and they purposely said, we're not going to learn how to do this. We'll wait to see for something to happen. And it cost them, instead of 10 million, it cost them $1 billion, well over $1 billion. Look at your business holistically. What are the long-term effects? What is it that people are going to remember you by? How is it they're going to remember you? So you need to consider all of the interests. And that takes us to the next point, which is, as you start to think of your business and your new startup, I want you to think of a purpose. You know, I invest in people with passionate ideas, and you hear that all the time. You have to be passionate. You have to be excited, and not only excited, but you have to take it to the next level. That passion needs to come out your pores. When people see you and they hear you talking about your startup, they should see that glimmer in your eye. They should see that shine. They should see you glowing. And one of the best ways to do that is to develop a purpose. We're all in it for profit, right? When I invest into a company, believe me, it's not, you know, it's not to sing Kumbaya around the fire camp all night. It's for profits. But I have found that I've invested into companies that had a purpose because they had more passion. And that passion is what I invested into. Those people will do anything to make it work. They will eat, sleep, drink their startup day and night, all week, all year long. It's that passion. But that passion is linear to purpose. What is the greater purpose? Now, if you have a greater purpose other than just profits, it's not a bad thing to show. It's not a bad thing to talk about. It's not a bad thing to reveal. Because people want to invest, and that's how you get buy-in. That's how you get buy-in with the employer promise initially. The values, beliefs, opportunity, that employer promise comes from the passion of the CEO. And although as a startup, you are the CEO, you are the head negotiator, and you are the janitor, and you are cleaning out your garage at the same time because that's where you work. It all comes from you. That purpose needs to emanate from you, primarily from the passions. It comes out. So create a project, create a company that has possibly a greater purpose. Something that you'll be passionate about beyond just profits. And we call this conscious capitalism. And we call it social entrepreneurship. These are essentially one and the same. Basically, startups with a purpose. startups with a purpose. Well, give me some examples, Aaron. Sure, okay. How about Tom's of Maine? Or Tom's Shoes. Every pair of Tom's shoes you buy, he gives away a pair to a less fortunate person that cannot afford shoes. There are numerous companies that are doing good with their profits. And they're expanding, they're growing, they're accelerating their business model because their business has a purpose, has a greater purpose. And that purpose can also be called your vision statement. That purpose is your vision statement. And the vision statement is an image of the future. And you need to create a vision statement because, again, you're going to need to get buy-in from your customers. You're going to need to get buy-in from your investors. And that vision statement, as I just mentioned, is an image of the future. How does that, as a startup CEO and as a startup founder, how does that coincide with your personal vision? The startup vision and your personal vision need to overlap. And then you're also going to have, for your business, for your startup, you're going to have a team vision. So you have your personal vision overlapping with your corporate culture, which is going to be delivered by you in the form of an employee promise. And then your startup vision, which is going to be what it is that you want to be when you grow up, what it is you want your business to be when you grow up, all need to coincide, and you have here a sweet spot. And your startup vision may have to do with quality, performance, best practices, etc. But just know that all of these three together are driven by the founders. They're driven by the founders. And the founders need to create what we call an elevator pitch. And an elevator pitch is 30 seconds to 2 minutes. And you're going to tell this story both investors and customers. You're also going to tell it to the employees. It's a story that needs to be told, and each one of these is going to be different. This one to the investors is going to be a different pitch than to your customers as it is to your employees. All very similar, but each one is going to be catered to their own, to each demographic that you are targeting, in this case, investors, customers, and employees. This is how you get buy-in. You know your business. You know what you're doing, and you know who you're giving your elevator pitch to every time you meet somebody. So you're not giving the same elevator pitch to a customer that you would to your investors. You're not giving that same elevator pitch to your employees that you are to your investors. They're different, and they want to hear different things. They want to know different things. Each one of them has a different mindset, but it'll all be very, very close, very similar to each other. And thus you will have overlap in your elevator pitch. And when you get buy-in from the employees are going to evangelize, and they're going to try to persuade your customers to buy your service, to buy your product. This is the call to action that you're hoping for. And it starts at the top. It starts at the top. And I don't know if I told you the story, but I had the luxury when I was getting my MBA at Thunderbird, I had the luxury of interviewing Mr. Michael Tucker. Mr. Michael Tucker was the CEO of Motorola when Motorola was a Fortune 50, Fortune 100, whatever it was company. It was when Motorola was a household name. It still is somewhat. Got a good brand behind it. But the question that I asked Mr. Tucker was, and I didn't know him. I didn't even know anyone who knew him, but I kept asking. And finally, I got a phone call after a couple of months. Somebody said, "Hey, Aram, I've got Mr. Tucker on the phone." I remember saying, "Hello, this is Aram. Hi, this is Mr. Tucker. I hear you're looking for me." "Yes, sir. I'd like to interview you. You're a CEO. You were the CEO of Motorola. And I want to know, what's the first thing you did when you became the CEO of Motorola?" And the first thing he told, I thought he was going to tell me some political statement, that I wasn't going to understand, things that, you hear politicians talk, they never answer the question, you wonder what it was that they said. And I thought maybe that's what I was going to hear. I didn't give him the benefit of the doubt. And I should have. And he said, Aaron, my first thing I did is I fired 2 individuals. Boy, he had my attention. "You fired 2 individuals, Mr. Tucker?" "Yes." "Why?" "Well, because they were not customer focused enough." Here was a man, an individual who was at the top of the food chain in an ivory tower, 30,000 feet up, never dealing with the customers. And his concern, though, was with the customers. And he fired 2 executives that were not customer focused enough. The culture that he wanted to bring was all about customer focus. It came from the top down. And he also talked about honesty, and he also talked about trust. And that is the employer promise that we talked about at the beginning of the class, which also is about ethics, because trust is so important when it comes to your employees trusting you that you're going to do what you say. And he said that it wasn't the most popular decision, that he was the decision maker. But he wanted people that were customer focused. And that's why Motorola, before he retired, Motorola was one of the largest companies in the world. They were the largest employer in Arizona. No question, no hand, no, there wasn't a debate. And that was because of Mr. Tucker's singular focus on customer service. That's what he wanted. And he got it. He got it, and that translated into 1 out of every 2 cell phones being made by Motorola by 1992, 1993. That resonated through the entire organization. The employee promise was met. The employer promise was met on the employee side, and it was also met on the customer side, on both the business to business and the business to community, the B2B and the B2C. Their reputation was stratospheric. I mean, it was a beautiful, beautifully run organization. And he created that elevator pitch, created that for the customers. But he knew that the employees were the ones that were going to deliver it. And so he set the example. Now, I want to shift gears quickly. And I want to talk a little bit about pricing. And we've talked about it before. Obviously, we know we're going to be at a premium price point because our product as a startup is going to be unique, higher quality, more customized, more intimate. But I wanted to introduce this to you. What we're used to here in the U.S. is fixed pricing. Outside of the U.S., it's all negotiated pricing. Fixed pricing is kind of, in many cases, going the way of the buffalo, going the way of the dodo bird. Negotiated pricing is becoming more relevant. As a startup, you're going to need to be flexible. You're going to need to generate revenues and generate sales. Your larger keystone competitors are operating off of a fixed pricing model, which is good for you because in this current climate right now, the real-time, real-world fixed pricing is going the way of the dodo bird. More and more people are asking for discounts on everything that they buy. Everything. Everything they purchase, everything they buy. It used to be that if you walked into a Mercedes-Benz dealership, if you couldn't pay the price, well, you're not their customer. They're not going to negotiate. They have a lot more competition now from Lexus or Jaguar or Cadillac. And they may not be willing to negotiate too much down, but they are willing to throw a lot more in. Have you noticed that they're willing to throw more into the package? They don't want to come down, but they'll put more in, whereas before you would have to pay for it. Now that doesn't help your bottom line, but it helps their bottom line, but it doesn't help you in terms of cost. But if you are really in the market for something, that may push you over the edge to buy it. So in a sense, they are negotiating. The fixed pricing model is not, it's not tenable for a startup. It's just very difficult for you to command the same time, all the time, fixed pricing. It should be higher pricing. It should be premium pricing. But that gives you the ability to negotiate. And don't be afraid to negotiate down if your price point is up here. I'd rather have 80% of the price point that I had before than 100% of no sales. You follow me? I'd rather have 80% of my original premium pricing and have sold it for that than have 100% of nothing. And the other aspect to this is that with negotiated pricing, you're going to get more of a long-term customer because they're going to know that they're going to be able to come back to you. Have you ever negotiated something and then you went back and you wanted to go back to that exact person yet again? I was at the auto parts store the other day, and I had a whole list of things that I was going to buy for that Land Cruiser that I just purchased. A whole bunch of stuff. And I walked in there and I told the gentleman, I said, hey, listen, I got a bunch of stuff to buy. Can you give me a discount? And I made sure that not everybody could hear in the store. And he said, yeah, I'll give you a 10% discount. He looked at the list and said, sure. And then about a week later, I went to go get oil. And I actually went to go get another part, and I stopped by. I get my oil at Costco. Buy that Mobil 1 oil at Costco. And I went in there, and sure enough, there he was. And I said, well, listen, I got to buy 8 quarts of oil. 8.5, actually 9 quarts of oil. And I can go to Costco and buy it. They sell 6 quarts for 35 bucks. Or I can buy it here. And he said, we'll match it. I said, fantastic. This auto parts store is a national chain. They're willing to negotiate. Everyone is willing to negotiate if you're willing to ask. Don't be afraid to ask. You're leaving money on the table. Now, if you are the owner, don't be afraid to come down. Again, in most cases, having 80 or 90% of the original sales price is better than having 100% of nothing. With that said, we have one more week left. Final exam will be given next Friday. We have 2 more classes where we've got to pile in a bunch of content. If you have any questions, any comments, email me, throw it on the discussion board, whatever it is, communicate with me, call me. And if you're ever on campus, I'm always in the startup labs when I'm not teaching. I will see you next Tuesday, same time, same channel. Over and out. Have a great weekend. Be safe.